In the midst of the coaster wars, one unlikely park joined the contest. The family-owned Kennywood Park, just outside Pittsburgh, carried a spirit rich with history and memories. However, the hometown park overshadowed giants in the 1990s by summoning the record-breaking Steel Phantom. At the time, it was the world's fastest coaster and had the longest drop ever built. Steel Phantom nonetheless lasted only one rough decade of operation. Its massive twisted layout was partially scrapped, but not entirely removed. The infamous looping coaster was resurrected and rebuilt into a legendary airtime machine, haunting thrill seekers to this day. This is the story of Steel Phantom and the Phantom's Revenge at Kennywood Park.
Feel your wrath of Phantom.
Western Pennsylvania's Kennywood Park is a timeless amusement park with a living history unlike most others. This time capsule feels like a step back in time because its beginnings date back to 1898, being among the countless trolley parks across the nation during that era. Through the decades, many trolley parks closed for one reason or another. Kennywood, however, has thrived as a hometown park. It's a leisurely escape from the industrial day-to-day life of the Pittsburgh area, honored as just one of 2 U.S. amusement parks with a National Historic Landmark status. Kennywood preserves a traditional atmosphere through a collection of historic rides, from vintage mechanical attractions to century-old wooden roller coasters. Some are the last of their kind, with the park featuring attractions of essentially every decade from the 20th century and beyond. The park has held on to these rides and its legacy by being careful in choosing which attractions to remove or replace. Such decisions have lasting impacts. That thoughtful selectivity has allowed Kennywood to preserve classics like the Old Mill Boat Ride and the Jackrabbit roller coaster, dating back to 1901 and 1920 respectively. Many parks have removed aging rides to make room for new fashioned attractions. Kennywood uniquely has done both. Despite its history, Kennywood has embraced modern thrills to stay up to speed in an ever-changing industry. Roller coasters by the 1970s had become more sophisticated than the classics of yesteryear. Steel looping coasters revolutionized amusement parks thanks to the state-of-the-art designs of Aero Development and Anton Schwarzkopf. Nearby parks were raising the bar with looping coasters such as Corkscrew at Cedar Point and Super Duper Looper at Hershey Park. To stay competitive in the region, Kennywood welcomed the future by rolling out a looping coaster of its own. The park, in partnership with Intamin, contracted German engineer Anton Schwarzkopf to manufacture a new installation of his shuttle loop model. The $2 million investment was built on the former site of the park's oldest building, once occupied by a funhouse and later a bumper car attraction. The structure was demolished in 1979 to make way for the new Schwarzkopf coaster. Known as Laser Loop, Kennywood's latest coaster debuted April 19, 1980. Laser Loop's flywheel launch accelerated to 54 miles per hour in 3.8 seconds into a vertical loop, up a spike, and falling back to complete the layout in reverse. A staff writer from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette shared an interesting review of the shuttle loop, explaining, quote, "It is a thrill. You feel as helpless as a sausage in a rocket blast-off," end quote. Laser Loop quickly became part of Kennywood's identity. At times, its signature spiral structure was strung with holiday lights in the winter and used as a launch point for summer stunt spectaculars. While Laser Loop was a hit with guests, management described it as a headache to maintain. Kennywood may be a smaller park, but it puts great care into maintaining its coasters. For example, the park's maintenance team routinely inspects and replaces the thousands of feet of wooden track across its historic coasters. Each section of wooden track is replaced as needed, resulting in a complete rebuild of each layout over the course of about every 10 years. Kennywood's dedication to keeping its wooden coasters in tip-top shape was impressive to say the least. Maintaining Laser Loop, however, was more of a challenge for the park. Upkeep included daily morning inspections by a 2-person crew, taking around 5 hours to cover both Laser Loop and its wooden neighbor, Thunderbolt. To fully inspect the track, the crew would walk and climb Laser Loop's layout, including its 139-foot spike. In a 1981 interview with the Pittsburgh Press, a maintenance worker described the dangers of the job, sharing, quote, "Being such a tall ride, it does move in the wind. When you're up there, you can feel it sway a bit," end quote. The task also required climbing halfway up Laser Loop's 72-foot vertical loop to visually inspect the upper half of the inversion. As one crew member told the Pittsburgh Press in 1984, quote, "You really have to be careful. If you slip, you're history," end quote. The German-engineered shuttle coaster came with its own set of maintenance challenges. Unlike Kennywood's other coasters, Laser Loop relied on an advanced computer system that only understood German, according to a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette report. Also, replacement parts for the coaster were expensive, being shipped from Europe. Though the behind-the-scenes maintenance was demanding, Laser Loop was always popular. However, its complications proved too much for the small park. Its days at Kennywood were numbered. Relatively speaking, Laser Loop was a smaller coaster that had been outclassed by others in the region. It was located on the edge of the park near the paid parking lot, which management had been eyeing for a possible expansion. The coaster was a headache and stood in the way of future developments. In addition to those challenges, the 1990 season marked Kennywood's lowest attendance since the 70s, largely due to a rainy summer. Park officials had to make a change to get visitors through the turnstiles the following season. Thus, Kennywood announced Laser Loop would be retired. The coaster, having thrilled more than 12 million riders across its 11 years of operation, launched for the final time on September 3, 1990. The coaster was purchased by a European firm to be relocated to another amusement park, making room for Kennywood's next major project. For a park with more than 90 years of history, retiring a major attraction was significant, but it was necessary for something bigger. It was a decision many parks were making at the time, and one manufacturer in particular was taking the industry to the top. As with many amusement park stories, the 1955 opening of Disneyland Park in Anaheim, California deserves to be mentioned. A great deal of Disneyland's opening day and early attractions were manufactured by a company called Arrow Development. Arrow opened its doors a decade earlier, staying afloat by taking on equipment-related jobs. Their work eventually shifted to manufacturing kiddie rides and later connecting with Walt Disney himself. The Arrow-Disney partnership led to major breakthroughs in the amusement industry, including the development of the first modern tubular steel track roller coaster, Matterhorn bobsleds. Arrow, following its partnership with Disney, moved forward under designer Ron Toomer and Dana Morgan, son of co-founder Ed Morgan. The company threw the industry for a loop in 1975, engineering the prototype for the first modern roller coaster with inversions. Arrow's latest innovation, Corkscrew at Knott's Berry Farm in California, was just the beginning for inverting roller coasters. The Corkscrew model was a breakout hit in the mid-70s, appearing in amusement parks across the US and Asia by the end of the decade. Building on that momentum, Arrow evolved the design and pushed the limits of height, speed, and intensity. By the mid to late 80s, Arrow, which became Aerodynamics, manufactured a line of custom mega loopers that rose above the rest of the industry. Vortex at Ohio's Kings Island turned riders upside down a whopping 6 times, a record in 1987. That was surpassed the following year by Shockwave at Chicago's Six Flags Great America, climbing 170 feet high with 7 inversions. Arrow hit 7 inversions once again in 1989 with Great American Scream Machine at New Jersey's Six Flags Great Adventure. At California's Six Flags Magic Mountain, Arrow outdid itself once again with Viper. This 7 inversion mega looper had staggering stats for its time, standing 188 feet tall and clocking in at 70 miles per hour. Back at Kennywood, park officials were well aware of Arrow's accomplishments with mega loopers. The park's general manager, Harry Henninger, took first-hand notice of Viper and its impressive banked first drop. Yet, Arrow's engineering capabilities magnified beyond the heights of Viper. In 1989, Aero took coaster engineering to the next level with its latest installment, Magnum XL200 at Cedar Point in Ohio. It was originally designed to be 187 feet tall, but Cedar Point requested to break the 200-foot barrier for a more marketable investment. Promoted as the first hypercoaster, this 205-foot giant dominated the Lake Erie shoreline with its record-breaking height and speed for a continuous circuit coaster.
In 1989, 200 feet might as well have been somewhere to the moon. It was incredible.
The opening of Magnum XL200 has been considered the start of the Coaster Wars, a period in which amusement parks competed year after year to open the next record-breaking thrill ride.
I think there's no limit now. I think the only limit we're going to see is what people will get on.
Kennywood, although a much smaller park than the likes of Cedar Point, was eager to modernize its ride lineup and enter the race. Park officials noticed what Cedar Point achieved with its attention-grabbing hypercoaster and wondered what a ride like that could do for their local park. A record-breaking ride in the place of Laser Loop would be great for marketing. Realistically though, building a record breaker was a pipe dream for Kennywood. The hometown park could not build a traditional hypercoaster for a few practical reasons. Big coasters required big commitments. For one, the only way a coaster could achieve record-breaking heights was with a large, land-consuming lift. A traditional lift hill climbing about 200 feet would logistically take up a long, continuous stretch of land. The landlocked Kennywood could not dedicate space for a towering lift hill, let alone a massive out-and-back layout like Magnum. The cost was another issue. Kennywood entertained just over 1 million visitors annually at the time, according to the park's manager in a 1990 Pittsburgh Press interview. Those attendance numbers, while fine for a park of that size, simply could not generate the revenue needed to outdo larger amusements in the region. Also, tall roller coaster elements required a lot of material for supports to raise the track hundreds of feet in the air. Reaching those heights came at a steep price. The family-owned park had a more limited budget and could not possibly afford the materials needed to construct a record-breaking hypercoaster. Kennywood was at a disadvantage, and a hypercoaster was unlikely. The park, however, did have one uncommon advantage: terrain. Kennywood was situated along a ravine with steep slopes down to the Monongahela River. The hilly property, however, has not kept the park from building new rides. In fact, some of Kennywood's longtime coasters made use of the area's natural landscape. The dips and drops of the historic Jackrabbit and Thunderbolt wooden roller coasters have hugged the area's hillsides since the 1920s. Because of the terrain, both these coasters have drops right out of the station with their lift hills partway through the course. Harry Henninger, or Henny for short, realized this advantage when dreaming of a record-breaking coaster. Henny, a third-generation employee at Kennywood, had the idea to use the ravine to break roller coaster records. The steep drop-off could theoretically be used for large, low-to-the-ground coaster elements without the need for tall structures, so Henny drafted layout concepts that made use of the terrain. Suddenly, Kennywood's goal of a record-breaking coaster felt within reach. Laser Loop's replacement could be on a scale never imagined possible, being a custom steel mega coaster. The next step was to find the right manufacturer for such a tall order. Following the maintenance issues of Laser Loop, Kennywood chose not to partner again with the shuttle coaster's manufacturer, nor its distributor, Schwarzkopf and Intamin respectively. Park officials ordered proposals from a few companies, but one stood out for its track record of successful mega coasters: Aerodynamics. Henny's concept combined a few of Aero's innovations, such as Viper's Drop, Magnum's Height, and Omega Looper's Intense Inversions, into one thrill ride. Aero had proven to be the clear choice for the job. The Utah-based manufacturer calculated and engineered Henny's layout concepts under the direction of designer Ron Toomer. The design followed a similar style to Aero's other coasters, featuring a moderately tall lift hill and a quadruple looping finale. What set this one apart, however, was a creative use of the park's steep ravine, resulting in the world's longest drop. That massive drop would also make it the fastest coaster in the world. Kennywood, home of the world's fastest coaster with the longest drop. They could get used to the sound of that. It was a custom design with a unique mix of elements, just what Kennywood needed to draw attention. But at what cost? A project like this, Magnum XL200 for example, could easily cost around $8 million, which was well out of the small park's budget. However, the terrain-hugging design of Kennywood's coaster kept cost to a more reasonable $4.5 million. The stats, price, and excitement matched exactly what the park was looking for. The project was greenlit, and Kennywood would never be the same again. Construction began as soon as the former laser loop was disassembled, with its original station being relocated and repurposed for the new coaster. Engineering changes delayed some prep work on the site, but the job was on track soon after. Sections of Arrow's signature tubular track arrived at Kennywood by summer 1990. In the meantime, Kennywood held an employee poll to name the new coaster, which was tentatively called the Big One. Possible names included Nightmare, Lightning Express, Excess Express, and Steel Phantom. Steel Phantom was the clear winner, receiving 3 times as many votes as the next closest contender. The name, which was officially announced in July 1990, matched the magnitude of the ride Kennywood was building. Construction for Steel Phantom continued through the off-season, though having twists and turns of its own. Park president Carl Hughes was optimistic the coaster could be ready by opening day, but the weather was not cooperative. Rain and wind delayed the job, costing several workdays. The weather pushed back the coaster's debut by about a month, but the crew made up for lost time by working 10-hour days, 6 days per week. As the project neared completion, some crew members worked nearly around the clock to catch up. The hard work paid off as the coaster was ready to open May 4th, 1991, just weeks after the original target date. In early May, brave media members and employees were the first to take on Pennsylvania's newest and largest coaster. Half joking, a reporter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette admitted he wondered whether he could, quote, avoid the assignment by getting hit by a car, end quote. Needless to say, Steel Phantom was intimidating, unlike anything built before, and the general public was ready to strap in. Real quick, I wanted to thank you for watching. You're making videos like this possible, so thanks. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll jump right back into the video. On Friday, May 10th, 1991, the world officially had a new fastest coaster and the longest drop ever built. For its debut, the all-new Steel Phantom redefined Kennywood's charm with its modern black track, sweeping white rails, and massive gray supports. Anxious crowds gathered for their first encounter on Steel Phantom, entering the queue along the lift hill, across a long ramp, and into the station. Riders boarded the 28-passenger train, pulled down their over-the-shoulder restraints, and prepared for the record-breaking drop and 4 inversions ahead. Once dispatched, the yellow train with a teal side stripe rolled out of the station, dipping into a small right-hand turn and up a slow ascent to the top of the 160-foot lift hill. At the peak of Kennywood's tallest coaster, the track curved into its prominent turnaround drop, banking 63 degrees. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette described the sensation of the 157-foot drop as stunning as a blast of cold water in the face. Though a thrilling way to start the ride, this wasn't even the coaster's biggest drop. That element was still ahead. After the first drop, the train coasted through a section of straight track to maintain momentum for the rise up the next hill. Atop the 110-foot hill, riders had a brief moment to catch their breath and take in a view of the Monongahela River before diving into an unprecedented sight, a 225-foot drop down the natural ravine. No coaster on Earth had a longer drop at the time, and few were even close. Between the lift hill and the deepest part of the second drop, Steel Phantom had a whopping 280-foot total height difference.
It wasn't 200 feet, it was 1,000 feet to the river. So it gave you a tremendous visual illusion that just added to the sensation.
The train barreled down the plunge, which was recognized by Guinness in 1993 for holding the world record for the fastest, longest, and steepest drop. The bottom of the drop was hidden by part of the neighboring Thunderbolt roller coaster from yesteryear, which the newcomer, Steel Phantom, raced through with needlepoint precision. This was a head chopper moment as the train zoomed through a narrow keyhole, briefly creating the illusion it might not fit. As a fun side note about the record-breaking drop, Universal Orlando borrowed a quick clip of it in a commercial years later to promote Islands of Adventure. Once at the bottom of the record-breaking dive, Steel Phantom hit its advertised top speed of 80 miles per hour, made possible by the height and momentum of the unique layout. Most coasters released into their biggest drop directly from the chain lift at about 5 miles per hour. Steel Phantom, however, entered its largest drop with more momentum. The train crested the hill at about 15 miles per hour, diving into the drop with more speed than most, and with no chain that would otherwise hold it back. At the ride's fastest point, the track snapped into an abrupt left turn, which was a harsh element for a high-speed coaster with over-the-shoulder restraints. Steel Phantom was a coaster of two halves. The first focused on drops and speed down the ravine, while the finale brought inversions and intense elements on the hillside. The train carried its extreme pacing into an upward transition that whipped into a vertical loop. The upside-down element curved into the next set of inversions known as the boomerang, which twisted the track through a butterfly-shaped knot. After a turn to the right, the coaster spiraled through one of Arrow's famous corkscrews, the final of 4 inversions. The layout meandered through a few right-hand turns until hitting the brake run and entering the station. Upon opening, Steel Phantom was a success. For locals, having a record-breaking coaster in their small hometown park was a point of pride. Its use of terrain, interaction with Thunderbolt, and unexpected inversions made Steel Phantom the type of coaster that could only exist at Kennywood. In the words of a columnist from the Pittsburgh Press in 1991, quote, "Not even Christmas as a kid could top having a great new coaster as close as West Mifflin. Anyone riding anything other than Steel Phantom from now on will be marking time or resting before getting back in line for the real ride," end quote. Those outside the media had high praise for the ride too. Parkgoers and devoted coaster enthusiasts raved about Kennywood's latest edition. Some coaster enthusiasts shared their thoughts with the Pittsburgh Press, calling it, quote, "one of life's great experiences. It's for anyone who enjoys traveling at illegal speeds," end quote. One enthusiast called it the most intense coaster they've ever been on, while another went as far to say it makes you find religion. One hinted at how a ride on Steel Phantom felt, describing, quote, "it's bang bang bang, one element after another," end quote. More than 2 million riders were brave enough to take on Steel Phantom in its first season, but not all of them were fans. In terms of intensity, the ride stood in a class of its own, for better or for worse.
Right, you don't want to do that too often. That was incredible.
Riders on Steel Phantom felt as helpless as a sausage in a rocket blast-off. Oh, that was for Laser Loop, never mind. But whatever that meant, it was probably still an accurate description for Steel Phantom based on the ride's reputation. On paper, Steel Phantom was an excellent coaster. In reality, it had its flaws. The most common complaint was its roughness, a problem made worse by the over-the-shoulder restraints. While these restraints were standard on Arrow's looping coaster model, Steel Phantom operated at higher speeds with more intensity than other installations. The layout's mix of quick transitions and relentless inversions often caused riders to bump their heads on the over-the-shoulder restraints. This wasn't so much an issue in the first half, including the 225-foot drop, but the rest of the layout was often considered too uncomfortable. Once the ride reached its fastest point, the course hurtled into a quick left turn. This element caused riders to hit their heads against the restraints while traveling no less than 80 miles per hour. Another rough spot came during the upward section into the vertical loop. Still having a lot of momentum from the drop, the train shuffled through that clumsy transition. Unsurprisingly, the 4 intense inversions only added to the discomfort for most riders. To get a sense of which elements were excessively rough, notice how the point of view videos were relatively steady until certain elements shook the camera. It was a quote-unquote Advil promoting coaster as described by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Do you remember the newspaper writer who would rather be hit by a car than ride Steel Phantom? He called it a, quote, sleek 3,000-foot medieval-like torture chamber, end quote. Even the coaster's designer, Ron Toomer, admitted in a 1991 interview he'd get sick as a dog if he actually rode Steel Phantom, though, despite his career, he was ironically prone to motion sickness. Not all the criticisms of Steel Phantom were tongue-in-cheek. Some riders made serious complaints that the rough ride caused neck pain. These issues only escalated. A few ride-related incidents occurred during Steel Phantom's opening weekend. The first report involved a mother and a daughter who claimed to have been injured after being thrown around excessively and repeatedly on the coaster. Another rider described being thrown around and jolted with excessive force, alleging the coaster was defective and unreasonably dangerous. These complaints resulted in a lawsuit from the Court of Common Pleas against Kennywood and the manufacturer. Occasional ride-related lawsuits were not unusual for an amusement park like Kennywood, which usually faced about 2 per year. As with all incidents, these claims were taken seriously, especially given the rough condition of this brand new attraction. In response to the criticism, Kennywood shut down Steel Phantom just after its opening weekend. During the closure, an investigation revealed the coaster exceeded its advertised top speed of 80 miles per hour, racing up to 83 miles per hour. Though a 3 mile per hour difference may not seem like much, this was much faster than anticipated. The higher speed directly affected the ride experience by making it more intense, especially the abrupt turns and inversions. Going back to previews in early May, the coaster was clocked going only 78.2 miles per hour, but was expected to top out at just 80 miles per hour when warmed up. Roller coasters can pull off different speeds depending on factors like temperature and the weight of the train, based on the weather and number of riders. As an attempt to improve the rough ride experience, Kennywood and Arrow made a permanent modification to Steel Phantom. Trim brakes were added to the upward slope into the first inversion, the vertical loop. This modification slowed the train before the twisted half of the layout, although the trim brakes were placed after the coaster's fastest moment, still allowing it to exceed its advertised top speed. Overall, this change made the forces more manageable. Ann Hughes, a park spokesperson, reassured the press by mentioning an adjustment to a brand new ride was normal practice, especially for one this ambitious. After its modification, Steel Phantom reopened a week and a half later on May 23, 1991. The trim brake alleviated some of the intensity and high-speed transitions, but Steel Phantom still wasn't perfect. Like any ride, Steel Phantom had its fans, especially coaster enthusiasts, but its rough reputation among the general public was spreading. Aero looping coasters, even in their prime, were notorious for being rough. They were designed and engineered without the advantage of modern methods. As coaster designs of that era became more intense, their limitations became more obvious. Their old-fashioned flaws were too much to ignore. Drachenfire at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, another aero looping coaster from this era, was a prime example of the manufacturer's shortcomings. It opened a year after Steel Phantom but shut down by the late 90s because of its painful layout. Steel Phantom in particular was unlike other coasters, combining hypercoaster and mega looper elements. Its unusual, intense layout was engineered in an old-school way and was even ricketier with its over-the-shoulder restraints. To convince anyone who may doubt how rough Steel Phantom was, consider this. To avoid injury, riders were instructed to remove any earrings before getting on. That rule said everything anyone needed to know. Steel Phantom was concerningly rough. That was no secret. When the park first planned the attraction that would become Steel Phantom, it was meant to replace a challenging coaster that was a headache to maintain. However, Kennywood ultimately traded one headache for another. Building Steel Phantom was a risk-reward decision. Kennywood reaped the rewards with record-breaking achievements, but the risks were becoming a real issue. Regardless of its criticisms, Steel Phantom was still a record-breaking coaster, but not for long. By its fourth season in 1994, Steel Phantom had to share its claim to fame of being the fastest coaster and having the longest drop when another aero hypercoaster, Desperado, opened at Buffalo Bill's Hotel and Casino. The drop record was officially bumped in 1996 by Fujiyama, a Japanese hypercoaster by Togo, which unofficially broke the speed title as well. Steel Phantom lost its records. The coaster industry passed it by in just half a decade. Before long, rides like Superman Escape from Krypton at Six Flags Magic Mountain shattered the structural height record, surpassing 400 feet. parks like Cedar Point and Nagashima Spa Land were on track to surpass the 300-foot barrier by the new millennium, which was unheard of for a continuous circuit coaster. Kennywood, lacking the space and budget, had no way to match or beat the astronomical coaster records being set at the time. The novelty of Steel Phantom was slipping away, and the hometown park was struggling to pull in crowds beyond its local base. The park, as expected, still took good care of Steel Phantom. The coaster added a second train in its sophomore season, bringing its capacity to 1,100 riders per hour. By the mid-90s, the two trains were updated with a blue finish and yellow trim. Regardless of the maintenance, ridership for Steel Phantom declined as the years went on. Its roughness was well known by then, and most riders found it too intense to enjoy, especially on repeat rides. Though it kept a loyal following, the coaster lacked wide appeal, took up a lot of square footage, and was no longer making an impact at the gate. Kennywood needed to make a change, and Steel Phantom's future was in jeopardy. Realistically, Kennywood was a landlocked park that had been fully developed by the mid-90s when the Lost Kennywood section opened. To add a new attraction, the park had no choice but to sacrifice an existing one. Kennywood would never consider removing one of its historic wooden coasters. Something else had to go. With a rough reputation and declining ridership, Steel Phantom was on borrowed time. In March 2000, Kennywood announced Steel Phantom would be retired at the end of its 10th season. Park chairman Carl Hughes stated the once record-breaking ride would be torn down for a new coaster, scheduled to open in spring 2001. According to the park, the decision was made to stay competitive by bringing in a new attraction. Steel Phantom's predecessor, Laser Loop, was sold and relocated after its closure. Steel Phantom, however, could not be relocated because of its custom dimensions. At best, it was expected to be sold for scrap or parts. It was a sad fate for one of the few hypercoasters in existence, a ride still consistently ranked among the world's best, and a point of pride for the Pittsburgh area. While some may have seen the announcement coming, it still came as a surprise to many. Steel Phantom was a polarizing coaster to say the least, so different folks took the news in different ways. Many in the public were excited about the possibilities of what might replace Steel Phantom. For others, the loss of a one-of-a-kind local coaster was disappointing. The thought of never hurtling down the ravine through Thunderbolt again was hard to accept.
Did we get any feedback when we announced that the Steel Phantom was coming out? We got tons of feedback. We got emails, we got phone calls, we got hate mail, we got tons of letters saying, how can you do this? How in the world can you take out the Steel Phantom, a top 10 coaster?
Fans were upset and made their feelings known. Kennywood received many letters expressing concern over the decision. The efforts continued online as devoted fans launched SaveThePhantom.com. The fan-run website featured a message board for discussions, info about the ride, and a countdown clock leading up to its inevitable closure. To fans, Steel Phantom defined the park and was just as important to Kennywood as its historic wooden coasters. The park had a habit of preserving its long-running coasters for historical and practical reasons. Outspoken parkgoers believed Steel Phantom deserved the same respect. If nothing else, the outpouring of support for the ride proved how beloved it was by parts of the community. Kennywood assured the decision was made carefully with the park's best interest in mind, but it was final. They had nowhere else to build a new coaster. Steel Phantom was definitely being torn down at the end of the 2000 season. Planning for the replacement began as early as 1999, but no details were shared early on. Park officials were exploring design options, focused mainly on the idea of a thrill ride with broader appeal than the ultra-intense Steel Phantom. Kennywood spokesperson Mary Lou Rosemeyer told the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, quote, "Just about anything is on the table at this point," end quote. The park had not yet partnered with a manufacturer. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette questioned the president of Intamin, a leading coaster manufacturer, whether they would take on the job of replacing Steel Phantom. He replied with a smile, quote, "Let me put it this way, we would be more than glad to do it," end quote. Intamin was developing a first-of-its-kind Giga coaster, the first complete circuit coaster over 300 feet tall. The price tag for such a coaster was hefty, making it well beyond Kennywood's reach. Whether or not Kennywood contacted Intamin about a similar Giga coaster is not publicly known. Park management likely received bids from several manufacturers. However, with limited space and budget, Kennywood had a short list of realistic options. One rumored possibility was Vekoma's suspended looping coaster model, which was a reasonably affordable high-thrill option. Perhaps the tried-and-true aerodynamics was in the running as well, but that remains purely speculative. As a quick aside, times had changed for Aero by the new millennium. The legendary manufacturer was falling behind in the modern amusement industry and filed for Chapter 11 within a few years. The company might not have had the capacity to take on the assignment. While Aero was out of the picture, its legacy still played an interesting role in the solution. Kennywood reached out to Dana Morgan, the son of Aero Development's co-founder. Morgan had a long history with Aero, working with the manufacturer since he was 10 years old. He left the company and started his own in 1983. D.H. Morgan Manufacturing, as the company was known, started off building new trains for wooden roller coasters. By the 90s, Morgan manufactured its own roller coasters, having a similar track style to what Aero had pioneered. Despite the company's brief portfolio, Morgan manufactured an impressive series of successful hypercoasters, as well as Steel Dragon 2000. This Nagashima Spaland Giga coaster broke the height, speed, and length records at the time of its debut. Back at Kennywood, park management weighed their options and reconsidered the idea of a brand new coaster. In partnership with D.H. Morgan Manufacturing, Kennywood reached a solution that would save the coaster while making it more enjoyable for most guests. This approach involved significantly modifying Steel Phantom instead of entirely removing it. The plan was practical, likely being an affordable alternative to a new coaster, and could satisfy upset fans. Kennywood at this point had been open for just over 100 years and had a history of preserving and occasionally reinventing long-standing rides. For the 1968 season, Kennywood renovated and extended its Pippin wooden roller coaster, which had operated since 1924. It reopened as Thunderbolt, with improved sections of the original layout, plus 1,000 feet of a new expansion. Thunderbolt, formerly Pippin, was a hybrid of old and new designs that collectively stood among the higher-rated coasters in the US, making the overhaul worthwhile. Ironically, the layout of Steel Phantom passed through that transformed wooden coaster. Likewise, the ambitious Aero coaster would soon get the Pippin Thunderbolt treatment. The basic concept was to keep Steel Phantom's best moments, its large drops, and remove the painful inversions. While Kennywood originally planned to hold off announcing the ride until winter 2001, the restlessness from fans led the park to break the news earlier than expected. In August 2000, Kennywood announced Steel Phantom would be converted into a new coaster experience known as the Phantom's Revenge. To promote the conversion, an outside marketing firm gave the Phantom its own persona and backstory. According to the legend, the spirit of Steel Phantom learned about Kennywood's plans to dismantle the coaster. Fans weren't the only ones upset about this news. The Phantom was even more disturbed. Park officials were oblivious to the Phantom's unrest and moved ahead with their plans to close the coaster. The Phantom was not pleased. All of a sudden, strange incidents started happening around Kennywood. The sky above Steel Phantom turned dark, even on sunny days. Its queue had a chill in the air, regardless of the weather. Gift shop shelves were mysteriously cleared, and nearby windows were found shattered. Someone, or something, had it out for Kennywood. Who, or what, was behind it all? The story took a strange turn when the blueprints for Kennywood's new ride went missing. They vanished without a trace until turning up in an unlikely way, shredded and scattered across the load platform of Steel Phantom. The employees tried to sweep it away, but the scraps of paper kept piling up. It was too much, forcing the ride to shut down. Then, everyone covered their ears as an awful noise screamed through the ride's loudspeakers. A deep, menacing voice made its presence known.
You dare vanquish the Steel Phantom without my consent?
The Phantom threatened.
Fear the wrath of the Phantom. Mortals did not create the Phantom legend, and cannot sever my presence from Kennywood. Hear me and know. Only I can transform the Steel Phantom, or you will face my vengeance.
Everyone looked as if they had seen a ghost, and well, that's because they had. Breaking the silence, a dark, cloudy figure floated into the station and whooshed to the infamous inversions. The shadowy cloud grew to the size of the coaster track, showing its green eyes and long hands that ripped apart each inversion. Panicked employees shouted, "Not our ride!"
Not your ride.
The Phantom insisted. People watched in horror as the Phantom tore apart the coaster, leaving only the first drop and iconic dive into the ravine unharmed. The Phantom parted with these words,
You will do my bidding.
Then the spirit disappeared. Despite the chaos and destruction, not a single piece of track was out of place. It was a confusing scene, but the vision was clear. Witnesses warned park management of the Phantom's demands, and they honored the spirit by canceling their plans to replace the coaster, but rather restore it so the legend could live on. While that was a creative way to announce the coaster's redesign, the actual development was a bit different. The Phantom's Revenge would be a Franken-coaster combining track sections by two different manufacturers. The goal was to create a smoother ride by embracing its best features, height and speed, and trading its knockout inversions for standout airtime. As the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette put it, quote, "While the loops will be missed, the headbanging they required will not be," end quote. D.H. Morgan Manufacturing took on the project, salvaging the decade-old Aero track and introducing a modified layout with new track. Considering Morgan's history with Aero, the new track style was adaptable to the classic tubular steel design. This time around, modern technology allowed for some advanced design and fabrication methods, resulting in a more sophisticated track profile. A little less than a third of that original Aero track was being reused, including the station, pre-lift section, lift hill, first drop, second hill, and brake run. The remaining sections were completely redesigned and rebuilt by D.H. Morgan Manufacturing. The legendary 225-foot drop, for example, was extended by a few feet, which would also increase the coaster's top speed. At one point in the planning phase, the second hill may have been redesigned as a double-up. The left-hand turn at the bottom of the Thunderbolt near Misc was retracked to be wider, reducing the abrupt discomfort of that element. Most notably, the former looping section was replaced with a collection of airtime hills and turns. Overall, the layout gained an additional 325 feet of track. By removing the coaster's inversions, the uncomfortable over-the-shoulder style restraints could be replaced by lap bars, leading to a smoother ride experience. Generally, fans were happy with the compromise and welcomed any improvements. The changes were largely celebrated as one fan remarked in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, quote, "There is no reason that Steel Phantom should maintain its current configuration, which often left this rider feeling as if he had been beaten around the head with a baseball bat," end quote. In the same publication, the president of the American Coaster Enthusiast Organization applauded the decision, complimenting Kennywood's ability to stay innovative and maintain its traditional charm. Some fans criticized the decision and the park officials responsible for it. They argued Steel Phantom, without its inversions, would lose what set it apart, making it too similar to the nearby wooden coasters. Penny addressed the concerns by saying, quote, "I'm very confident that after this opens, the overwhelming opinion will be, they did a good thing, they made this better," end quote. Supporters of the change of course disagreed with the doubters, saying the people against it were standing in the way of progress, as reported by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. No matter where opinions fell, everyone could agree, people cared about this ride. However, as developments were underway, the original Steel Phantom had only a few days left of operation. On its final day, Monday, September 5th, 2000, Steel Phantom received a proper farewell with crowd and energy levels that matched its debut a decade prior. As one fan commented online, quote, "I can't remember the last time I saw so many people riding the Steel Phantom," end quote. The organizer behind SaveThePhantom.com, who was on the final public train, described the send-off by saying, quote, "The feeling was indescribable. Everyone cheering, clapping. Even though it was an end to a great ride, it seemed more like a celebration. That final ride will stay imprinted in my head as long as I walk the earth." End quote. The following morning, park employees, family, and friends had the chance to ride one final time. After the coaster's closure, the nearby Carnegie Science Center preserved Steel Phantom as a motion simulator experience. The deconstruction of Steel Phantom began in autumn 2000, starting with the removal of its inversions. The off-season construction process had complications early on while prepping the ground. As a park spokesperson put it in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, quote, "The underground part of the Revenge was as much of a challenge, if not more so, than the actual coaster building." End quote. Crews dug as deep as 32 feet to reach bedrock and install the massive caissons for the support footers, as underground utilities complicated the work. Some steps were more straightforward as the station, lift, and brakes were already in place. Over the course of 3.5 weeks, those surviving sections were painted with the attraction's new colors, teal track with black supports. The 2,368 feet of new track arrived in 75 truckloads as construction was going strong. However, off-season rain caused muddy conditions and delays. Thus, the Phantom's Revenge was not ready in time for Kennywood's opening day. Thunderbolt, which was partially disassembled during construction because of the near miss, also missed the park's opening that season. The delay was not for a lack of effort, as crews put in full 7-day work weeks of 10-hour shifts to get back on track. The job reached a milestone in late April 2001 when the final piece of track was installed, and the 8-month construction project wrapped up shortly after on May 8th. The Phantom's Revenge soft opened on Friday, May 18th, 2001, and officially opened to the public the following day, Sunday, May 19th. Riders got in line for the redesigned coaster beneath its 160-foot teal lift hill, stretched high above the relatively new Lost Kennywood section. A dark hooded phantom figure marked the entrance. The long elevated queue led to a decorative phantom portal, which was the entrance to the station. The trains were tailor-made for the Phantom's Revenge. They were completely unlike those on other Morgan Hypers, which made this coaster experience unique for several reasons. Morgan built the new trains using the repurposed Aero chassis from Steel Phantom, modifying them with custom fabricated bodies, almost like a stylish classic car, and newly designed harnesses. Because the framework was originally built for over-the-shoulder restraints, traditional front-mounted lap bars were physically not an option. Instead, Morgan's solution was to install side-mounted lap bars, giving riders more space while still being safe and secure. Kennywood was proud the ride finally had comfortable restraints, even advertising no shoulder harness as a key feature. The Phantom's Revenge only had one train for its first season, until the second was ready the following year. The trains had 7 cars, each seating 4 passengers for a total of 28 per cycle, giving the coaster a theoretical capacity of 1,400 riders per hour. Once riders pulled down their side-mounted lap bars, the train rolled into a layout familiar to anyone who rode Steel Phantom: a turn out of the station, up the lift hill, down a 157-foot banked drop, across some straight track, and up a second hill. The rest of the layout from here was retracked and redesigned by Morgan. The train coasted over the 110-foot hill and rolled into its once record-breaking plunge down the ravine, which was slightly extended to 228 feet. Anyone with their hands up down the drop probably held on tight as the train narrowly zipped through Thunderbolt. At this point, the upgraded Phantom's Revenge raced to its new top speed of 85 miles per hour, pulling into a widened 82-degree left-hand turn. The layout banked to the other direction, passing through a tunnel under Thunderbolt and curving around the historic Turtle Tumblebug attraction. In place of the old inversions, the Phantom's Revenge rushed into a cluster of tight turns, snappy dips, and powerful airtime hills, which a review in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette compared to riding a bucking bronco. After a rapidly paced second half, the coaster hit the brakes and returned to the station. The newly renovated coaster was instantly beloved, being applauded for its intensity and, better yet, its smoothness. The coaster became noticeably more enjoyable with its rider-friendly bunny hills that took the place of the former inversions. Most importantly, riders suddenly found the Phantom's Revenge far more comfortable thanks to its widely praised lap bars that replaced the jarring over-the-shoulder restraints. The new lap bars securely gave riders more freedom without the pain of headbanging. Guests could painlessly ride the Phantom's Revenge over and over, unlike the one-and-done tendency most had before the overhaul. The old Steel Phantom was still highly ranked in its final years, being in the top 20 steel coasters in the Golden Ticket Awards. However, after the Phantom's Revenge opened, it climbed as high as number 5. Kennywood's decision to transform Steel Phantom into the Phantom's Revenge proved to be the right choice. 2 decades after its makeover, the Phantom's Revenge remains a beloved favorite among parkgoers and roller coaster enthusiasts alike. The coaster has been well cared for in true Kennywood fashion and has held up remarkably well. Much of the original aero track has been replaced over the years as part of ongoing maintenance. For the 2009 season, it opened with newly fabricated track sections from the first drop to the top of the second hill. Nowadays, the only remaining sections of aero track are functional elements such as the lift hill, station, storage track, and brake run. To tell the difference between the two track types, notice how the Morgan sections have large cross ties that wrap around the track spine, similar to a ribbed pattern. The surviving aero segments have smaller cross ties that connect mostly atop the spine. Speaking of aero, the scraps of Phantom's old track are scattered around as decoration at the Diesel Driver's Children's Ride. On the topic of remnants, some footers from Laser Loop can be seen from Phantom's queue, while a few from Steel Phantom can still be spotted during the ride. The fiberglass train shells from the original Steel Phantom trains have survived in private collections. For the 2022 season, Kennywood repainted the terrifying teal track to petrifying purple, a color chosen by fans and done by Bainham Solutions. The Phantom's Revenge is essential to the park's identity, being honored in many ways. Its larger-than-life presence inspired the name of the Little Phantom Kiddie Coaster, and it continues to play a spirited role in the annual Phantom Fall Fest event. The original Steel Phantom is missed, but many who have ridden both consider the Phantom's Revenge to be the better ride. The idea behind Steel Phantom still lives on as riders take the 200-plus foot drop down the ravine to this day. Phantom's famous drop down the hillside remains elite after all these years, and the hills in the second half make it an airtime machine unlike any other. It has stood the test of time, still ranking among the best steel coasters in the Golden Ticket Awards. It's perfectly chaotic. No other coaster gives riders the sensation of diving down a ravine with nothing but a pool noodle type lap bar to stay strapped in. Its classic feel, especially the absence of air gates in the station, captures the historic and timeless character of Kennywood. The records Steel Phantom broke back in the 90s have long been outdone, but Revenge is still among the fastest coasters in the world. Modern record setters reach over 300, 400, and soon enough 600 feet, but that doesn't stop fans from coming back to experience the unmistakable thrill of the Phantom's Revenge. It stood as Kennywood's tallest coaster until the 220-foot Steel Curtain opened in 2019. Ironically, Steel Curtain replaced an aero log flume ride and was manufactured by S&S Sensei Technologies, the company that acquired the assets of the now-defunct Aerodynamics. In a way, the football-themed hypercoaster feels like a spiritual successor to Steel Phantom as it dives 205 feet into 9 inversions, tying the North American record. Dana Morgan retired from the industry in 2001, selling the assets of D.H. Morgan Manufacturing to Chance Rides. Chance went on to produce a mini Phantom's Revenge-like coaster, Lightning Run, at Kentucky Kingdom. Morgan's redesign of the Phantom was rare for its time. However, in recent years, more parks and manufacturers have taken on conversions that are a hit with fans. Take for example Rocky Mountain Construction's work to transform aging wooden coasters into hybrid masterpieces, or Zamperla's efforts to give the 420-foot tall Top Thrill dragster a second life. The Phantom's Revenge stands as a ghost of aero past, but other loopers of the era did not stand the test of time. Viper at Six Flags Magic Mountain, which inspired Steel Phantom's first drop, is the final remaining Aero Mega Looper as of 2025. Steel Phantom may have been criticized for being rough, but no one could say it was boring. As its sequel continues, the coaster is as thrilling as ever, ready to be enjoyed by generations to come. Kennywood and its long-standing collection of wooden coasters is now under the ownership of Hershend Family Entertainment, which also owns world-class parks such as Dollywood and Silver Dollar City. Considering the way Kennywood cares for its coasters, Pittsburgh locals and coaster enthusiasts alike can continue to feel the thrilling spirit of the Phantom's Revenge. The spirit of Kennywood is that of history, tradition, and memories. The spirit of Kennywood is the Phantom's Revenge. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts down in the comments. Have you been on Steel Phantom or the Phantom's Revenge? How do you feel about these legendary coasters? Special thanks to the Storybook Amusement patrons. Shout out to the producer credits, Parallel Discover, and Nick E. Dive deeper into Storybook Amusement on social media, Patreon, storybookamusement.com, and with merch. Find all the links in the description, and check out these other videos while you're here. Thanks everyone for watching. You make videos like this possible, and I'll always appreciate that. Thank you.